JJ McCarthy's in the concussion protocol, which means we are Brosmering, baby. Batten down the hatches. Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast.
You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Locked On Vikings podcast, where we're always trying to learn something new. It's part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcasting network. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and if your bet wins, you'll get $300 in bonus bets to use across the app. Today on the show is Town Hall Tuesday, so if you have questions, if you have hot takes, if you have even bold predictions for Friday for the next game against Seattle, you can put them in the Google Doc, which is linked in the show notes to any episode. And boy, my goodness, were there a lot. There was over 100 responses this week, which is incredible. I haven't had that in a while, so I really appreciate that. Even though most of them weren't really questions, they were just kind of different ways of saying, woe is JJ McCarthy, which I don't think a lot of you expected me to answer those questions, but thanks for participating, I guess. But before we get into the questions, I think let's just go over the basics of the situation. JJ McCarthy is in the concussion protocol. He suffered a concussion at some point in the Lambeau game. To me, there are 3 different plays you could point to. They all happened, I think, within 45 real-life minutes of each other. Could have been multiple. Where McCarthy's head slammed against the turf pretty bad. There was a sack that almost was a safety. It was Devontae Wyatt got the sack, and his head kind of hit the turf pretty hard. And it's November, it's Lambeau. That's not soft turf. Like that's cold hard ground. And his head slammed it pretty hard. And then in the fourth quarter, on their last possession, McCarthy takes a pretty bad hit on a scramble. His head gets driven crown first into the ground. And on the very next play, as he's hit as he throws, and he kind of goes down face first, and his head kind of slams into the turf like crash dummy style. And on the next play after that, he throws a really hideously bad interception over Jalen Nailor's head. And that was it. The Vikings wouldn't see the ball again. So it could have been any of those. It could have been multiple of those, to be honest. Those all looked like they all could have been concussive hits. So who knows when it happened or how it started to happen, but McCarthy didn't really report the symptoms until the plane ride home. And that's kind of the bummer about concussions is like concussion detection relies a lot on self-reported symptoms. There's not, it's not like you're bleeding, you kind of have to tell somebody, hey, I feel like I have a headache. I'm a little bit dizzy. Except in some of the most extreme cases where someone gets knocked out or whatever, it can be hard to detect without that. So it kind of relies on those self-reported symptoms. That's actually one of the questions. It came from Jeff. Is it unusual for McCarthy's injuries to not come to light or even be known until 1 or 2 days after the game? I don't think that's true about so there's been 3 injuries, right? There's the meniscus, and yes, those present that way sometimes. There was the high ankle, which they were dealing with in the game. They were taping him up. They he was in discussion with the medical staff. It just wasn't reported on what it was or how much time it was going to cost him until after the game, which that's kind of how ankles can be too. Like you kind of play through it on the adrenaline. You tape it up. You say, I'm going to be fine. You wake up the next morning and it looks like you have an elephant's foot and you go, okay, maybe I need some time for this to heal. And then the concussion, that could have happened 25 seconds before his last play of the game. So none of that seems unusual to me. The next question comes, so let's do the Brosmer thing, because Brosmer is going to play, and he'll probably have a very baby's first offense. He'll have very training wheels. It's going to look like what Carson Wentz's was, and it's probably going to produce better than what the Vikings have done, because what the Vikings are doing on offense with McCarthy is fundamentally broken. I will talk a lot more about that tomorrow, so put a pin in that. But it seems like whatever this disease Kevin O'Connell has, he really has it with McCarthy. That doesn't absolve McCarthy of the stuff that he's doing wrong that's worse than Wentz and maybe even worse than Brosmer. And worse than Johnny Manziel at his worst. It's really, really bad. But with Wentz, O'Connell resisted some of his worst schematic instincts. He might do that again with Brosmer, and I think it might work a little better, but it certainly is not going to be a winning formula. The Vikings are 10.5-point dogs on the road, and that's absolutely appropriate. The only path to winning this game against the Seahawks requires the Seahawks to screw up pretty bad. But King Constable asks, would it be beneficial to McCarthy's development to start subtly giving Brosmer some more reps in practice, or is it too early to light a competition-fueled fire under JJ's feet? I don't know what people think happens in these like rooms. Do people think we have to subtly giving him reps, like being sly about it so nobody notices, but also we're lighting a fire under you, kid. Like, are we pushing him with competition? Which I don't think is a good idea, for the record. He is very clearly mentally dissolving. I think adding more pressure to that would only make it worse. And you got to, at a certain point, start managing a person, not just start looking to whatever other quarterback. But I think that's kind of what we always want to do. Is we don't like what we're looking at, and we start looking out to the stars to see whatever else we can find. But I also think that like McCarthy is not going to get better on the bench. He's not going to get better on in the trainer's room. He's not going to get better in the classroom. The only way he gets better is by playing NFL football. And if you don't want to go through the process of pursuing that, that's fine. You probably shouldn't have designed your entire team around a developmental young quarterback. But that's where we are. If you don't want to go through the pains of, I don't even want to call them growing pains, they're worse than that. If you don't want to go through the horrors of developing a quarterback, you shouldn't have built a team that is like predicated on developing a quarterback. You should have gone with Darnold, pay the money, and have a worse O-line. That's what you needed to have. But that's not what we did, and so that's not where we are. But I think the other thing I'll say is, like, if you were going to put Darnold on the bench, try to reset his mechanics, say get out of the game, the game-to-game thing of it, and let's see if we can fix you Bryce Young, Andy Dalton style, then go ahead and just do that, no matter who goes in, right? Because at this point, we don't care. The season's over. It's not happening. They would have to literally win out. It's not happening. This team sucks. But I just don't think that there's really... I think that feels a little bit more like looking for an escape hatch instead of a solution to a problem. Kiefer says, how much do you think McCarthy having a baby at the start of the season is impacting his ability to learn and develop? I mean, you lose a lot of sleep. Yeah, sure. Your mental is going to be a little bit messed up. But I think, that's a lame excuse. That happens. NFL players have a kid in the middle of the season sometimes, and they're never going to use it to try to, excuse away bad play. I don't think that that's valid. Sure, it's maybe a factor. You can say, yeah, I'm a little bit tired. Tough. Get over it. You're in the NFL. But I think for McCarthy, he definitely takes to coaching. That we are very sure of. Maybe too much. He is told to, get control of his feet in the pocket. He turns into a statue in the pocket. You know what I mean? Like that. He has absolutely taken to the coaching emphasis of Kevin O'Connell. And I think Kevin O'Connell and Josh McCown have been unfocused in what they have told him. And so now he's trying to juggle too many things in his mind, and it just has kind of fallen apart. But it maybe him having a baby at the start of the season had something to do with it. But if it did, that would not validly excuse anything away. I think that would actually be pretty embarrassingly bad. Everybody's a little sleep deprived. Everybody's working hard. Everybody's got young kids. Like a lot of these players have young kids. You're not the only one, and that's not an excuse. Nate from South Carolina asks, I fully admit that that was some of the worst QB play I've ever seen, but we've all lost the ability to remember that McCarthy is 22 years old and that was his 6th career start. Do you still buy into the patient approach, or was Sunday's game the breaking point? Okay, so I want to be really careful here because I do kind of on principle just think patience is always correct. No quarterback is going to, that doesn't start out, white hot Jaden Daniels style. If you have that, great. You're happy. You're not thinking about this. But no quarterback that struggles a little bit or a lot of it is going to figure it out if you give up on him the second you see it. It's never going to happen. You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, right? So for me, on principle, McCarthy starts the whole season no matter how bad he is. And I went into the season with that idea, health notwithstanding. He starts the whole season no matter how bad he is. Then the only thing that could get in the way of that would be like a Case Keenum situation, right? Where somebody's playing so well, you just simply can't justify benching him, which some people tried to tell me Wentz was doing. I still think you people are insane. But I would say My concern with his development is less about, is it impossible for him to develop? It is never impossible. You can always learn new things. It is literally the thing I say at the beginning of every show. We are always trying to learn something new. You can. It is possible for sure. Can the Vikings teach it? Now that's a question. And so I am losing faith that the Vikings, as they are constructed, can teach young players new things. It's not just JJ, man. They gave up on Lewis Seen after 2 seasons. They've given up on Dallas Turner. He rushed the passer 8 times, and he's getting pressure and doing stuff with it. And they're still like, nah, we don't want you, young kid. They have a very, very rare track record of developing a young player. And maybe Kwesi just can't find any young talent that's good. But sometimes he's taking guys that we know are bad but are raw and athletic with the assumption that the coaches are going to develop them. And that always fails. GM knew what he was getting into, and he was putting faith in the coaches that wasn't paid back. That tells me you may have the wrong coaches in place. So I don't trust them to develop JJ McCarthy. And from there, you can take your diverging path, right? You can say, okay, we're going to try to get different developers in the building, or you can say, we're going to not try to develop a QB. Thanks, but no thanks. We're going to Josh Rosen you. Thank you for your 2nd round pick. Whoever wants to pick up that project, and we'll get a veteran in here. To that end, H asks Joe Burrow for 3 firsts, 3 seconds, and McCarthy, who says no. So Joe Burrow in Cincinnati, this is the kind of thing that I kind of will never really fully believe until it's actually a headline and it's happening. But it's a thing. Go listen to Locked On Bengals. There's tension, but whatever it is, I've got a few more questions and some hot takes coming up next on Locked On Vikings. Today's episode of Locked On Vikings is brought to you by FanDuel. It's America's #1 sports book. Hey, the NBA is here. If you decide you don't want to watch the Minnesota Vikings and instead you would like to be eviscerated by the Minnesota Timberwolves, you can go do that. And if you need a little something extra to help keep you into the action, FanDuel is a great option. If the Wolves are getting just blown out, or the Vikings for that matter, you can make a bunch of live bets at halftime and do a same game parlay and just decide, I'm rooting for that. I don't know if we're going to win, but let's see if Jordan Addison can get 25 yards in the second half. That's the kind of thing you can find at FanDuel. And right now, FanDuel is giving new customers $300 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. So head to FanDuel.com to sign up and play your game with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Moving on here with Town Hall Tuesday on the Locked On Vikings podcast. Maybe a 4th round pick asks, what could the Vikings get from trading McCarthy? If a lot of people ask, hey, is this a Josh Rosen situation? Again, the biggest difference, I would say, the Cardinals had, when they did the Josh Rosen thing, they had the #1 overall pick. And it wasn't until they had the #1 overall pick. I'm not talking top 5, top 10, which the Vikings could be in if they keep losing. I am talking the literal #1 overall pick, and that there was a prospect coming out that was hyped to the nines. I mean, Kyler Murray, like 2 different professional sports leagues were fighting over him. This guy was the athlete of athletes. He was the runaway #1 overall pick, and he was supposed to be the next big thing. If that guy is coming out this year, and I don't know, I haven't looked at the college quarterbacks at all, and you get the #1 overall pick, you're going to look at your own guy with some side eye and see what you think, right? Even if you have some kind of commitment to that guy. But to get the 4th dude, to get this year's Paxton Lynch, yeah, no, we're not doing that, right? It's a different thing. If you've got a line on Joe Burrow, if he asks out of Cincinnati and then they call you and say, hey, he would play for Minnesota because his buddy Justin is there, and suddenly you start negotiating 2nd round, you're not letting JJ McCarthy stop you from pursuing that if that falls in your lap, right? But we're talking about some pretty extreme outlier situations. But let's say you do say, I'm done with this. We shouldn't have thought we could develop a quarterback. We can't develop a quarterback. This guy was the wrong idea. We're going to take our L and move on. And you want to use the Josh Rosen trade as a sort of starting, like a jumping off point. It was a 2nd round pick and a 5th round pick the following year. That was what it was. It was a late 2nd round pick for whatever that's worth too. So that would probably be the kind of thing you're looking for. These guys have draft grades on people. And if you're a team that's calling the Vikings and saying, we'll take McCarthy, you probably had a high draft grade on them. And you probably think your guys can develop young talent better than the Vikings can. And you're probably right about that. So they're still going to, like the shine of the draft grade and all of the sort of recruiting hype and sort of lower level hype doesn't all wear off in one bad year. You can look at it and say, well, he wasn't really set up to succeed because these guys that probably all have gotten fired by the time you're making these negotiations, well, it's all their fault and I can fix him, right? Teams do that a lot with players that maybe they're right about, maybe they're wrong about, but they'll pay for it. The next one comes from Glimpy, who asks, is the Baltimore Ravens routine going to continue? Since we lost, are we going to fire KOC? Yeah, so this is a thing a lot of people have come up with. On the squad show, somebody said that was like my stat. It is not. I forget who said that, and it happened too fast for me to like not take credit. But I want to be clear. I didn't notice that the first time. Somebody else said it. But it is funny. So if you're unfamiliar, since 2000, every time the Vikings play the Ravens, they either go to the NFC Championship, which happens if they win the game. And if they lose the Ravens game, they fire their coach. So if that happens, it would mean Kevin O'Connell is getting fired because the Vikings lost to the Ravens. Are we going to fire KOC? Probably not. You know, I would have to think that there's something we don't know about yet going on behind the scenes that would explain that. If it happened, I would be pretty surprised. But I think the leash has gotten shorter. I said this yesterday on the show, but I'll reiterate. They put all of the onus on Kevin O'Connell for this. They told him, you have carte blanche. Whatever you say at quarterback goes. We trust you. And that decision was wrong, right? That decision let Darnold out. He's about to go hang an absolute clinic on you. They went with the young quarterback on the premise that they would be able to develop him. They have failed to develop him. Everything about that decision went bad, and all of the responsibility of that decision very publicly was on Kevin O'Connell. So I think he has earned a lot of leeway, and I think he has burned through most of it. So my opinion on this is Kevin O'Connell's on the hot seat in 2026, but I do think that firing him this year would require more than what we know about. There'd have to be something going on that we don't know about yet for it to make sense to me. But we're not far. Blake asks, is it actually realistic that Kwesi Adofo-Mensah could lose his job if things don't get better by the end of the season? The Wolves have preached and practiced extreme patience during their tenure, and that seems impatient by their standards. Yeah, it does. And for both of these situations, it probably bears mentioning. They did both just sign contract extensions at the offseason. I don't think that goes very far because there's no salary cap for that. It's just billionaire money. And I mean, you know, that they can sneeze and lose billions of dollars. So like, who cares? So it's like kind of that money's kind of fake and doesn't really mean a lot, but it bears mentioning at least. But I would say if the Vikings decide, all right, McCarthy's a bust, we're moving on. We're Josh Rosening this. It's over. If they decide that, I really shudder to think of letting Kwesi and O'Connell be the same guys to go make the next QB decision. I do not believe that they have earned a lot of trust in, all right, like you're going deep into rebuilding mode if you're doing that, by the way. Like, let's really chase that rabbit for a second. If you decide JJ McCarthy's not the guy, right? And you're going back in, you're probably picking somewhere in the top 10, but not top 5 is probably where I'm going to guess the Vikings end up. So you're not getting one of the top 2 QBs, right? So you're either drafting somebody who's probably more of a project and needing to develop that guy, or you're going for some reclamation project veteran. You know, you're trying to get maybe a Kyler Murray out of Arizona or a Tua out of Miami or somebody in that vein, right? Or somebody that, you know, a Mac Jones that I don't know if he's really that good, but maybe we can get something out of him. And you're kind of stretching every single bit you can to go 8 and 9. That either way, it's really difficult to see whatever that becomes immediately becoming successful. Not to mention, you're going to have some losses and some turnover in the offseason. You're going to shed some of these old guys that aren't working out. You're going to shed some contracts, and it's going to be a couple years now. This season has gone poorly enough where its ramifications are going to spill over into future seasons. If you're one of those people that needs to talk themselves in every year to this could maybe be the year, or you're not watching, I will see you in 2029. It's going to be a while. This one, they had put everything into the next 3-year stretch the plan was for the next 3-year stretch to be this roster runs it back with JJ McCarthy over and over and over again. If they're giving up on that, this team is not built to just quickly pivot into something else. It's going to take a couple years for them to have a focused idea again. And that kind of means it's going to be a different group of people running things. So in the world of patience, the idea of give JJ McCarthy a couple of years and see if he works through some of these issues and becomes a more reasonable quarterback, or wait like 4 years for a whole nother thing to grow from scratch. One is still kind of faster than the other if we're worried about time. If you're worried about how long do I have to wait, but I'm going to be super real with you. All right. One thing I'll never do is lie to you. If you need the Vikings to be a Super Bowl team to care about the Vikings, I will see you 2 presidential administrations from now. It's going to be a while. Jake asks, when Brian Flores was hired, I believe he made an explanation about how week-to-week personnel decisions could be very matchup-based. But now you're framing it as benching, unbenching, and rebenching, and that they don't know what they're doing. Is the difference just that it's not successful and they're losing so it looks worse? Okay, this is a good shout, and I think it's a kind of a reasonable critique of the way that I've put this. And I think the difference, the reason that I haven't read that as, because like it's not something that I really considered, is this rotation game plan stuff, or is it benching and rebenching? Or it's not something I never really read it as game plan stuff. And it's because it hasn't really lined up with the kind of game plan that you would think. Like taking Hargrave had one of his most active and successful games against the Lions. And if he's the guy that you can't trust in the run game and you're using him the most against the Lions, that doesn't feel like you did the game plan to me. Maybe it was about interior pressure against Goff or something, but that feels a little bit like that feels like missing the forest for the trees. I don't know. But for guys like Theo Jackson, it hasn't had anything to do with who they're playing. It has just gone down steadily week in and week out, week in and week out. It went up this week because Josh Metellus was hurt, but like he was fully off the field before that happened. With Ivan Pace, it has not mattered who they wanted. They took him out. And so with me and the questions of indecision, it tells me, a decision was made week 1 and a different decision was made week 6. Somebody's either being indecisive or somebody else is stepping in, pulling rank and forcing the team to make their decision different. Either way, the unit as a whole has indecision, and that's what I'm critiquing. And it doesn't appear to correlate to what would make sense for those game plans. Anonymous asks, what is your opinion on McCarthy's toughness? No doubt he's tough. He's taking hits from NFL players, but now 4 times after games, he's reported symptoms of an injury not apparent in game. Here's the thing, Anonymous. If you're the same Anonymous that submitted like 4 really, really angry questions, this is the one that I took because it was the only semi-reasonable one. Or if you're not that person, ignore that. Why do you want my opinion on an NFL player's toughness? I have no idea. He could be reporting every tiny little fingernail, and you could say that he's a weakling for that, or he could be dealing with several ailments and gutting through them all. Based on the history of McCarthy and the stories that have come out of high school and college about when he has gotten a little hurty here or there, he's basically always gutted through it. He very famously played a high school game on a broken thumb on his throwing hand and threw really well. And so I would be very reticent to be like, wow, what a little sissy boy with his concussion symptoms. I don't know if you're a YouTube viewer or an audio listener, but if you're a YouTube viewer, you might be really raising an eyebrow at somebody asking my opinion on someone else's toughness. That is not how I am built, my friend. Let's go to, that one was in and of itself a hot take, but I got some real on purpose hot takes coming up next on Locked On Vikings.
I'm Cody Rourke from Locked On Broncos, and this episode is brought to you by Peloton. Peloton is shaping the future of fitness with the brand new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus, powered by Peloton IQ. This is Peloton's most advanced equipment yet, giving you real-time guidance and endless ways to move, whether you're running, lifting, or you're cross-training with your favorite instructors like Alex Toussaint. It's training reimagined to make your workout more personal. Peloton is built for breakthroughs with features that help you plan, stay motivated, and hit peak performance. You can let yourself run, lift, flex, and go while Peloton handles all the rest. Plus, Peloton IQ provides real-time strength coaching, tracking your progress and suggesting weights that challenge you so you can get stronger. Plus, the new movement tracking camera, it counts your reps and corrects your form in real time, making sure every rep is safer and smarter. So let yourself run, lift, flex, push, and go. Explore the new Peloton Cross-Training Tread Plus at onepeloton.com.
Moving on with the Locked On Vikings podcast, the first hot take of the day comes from Snow is Coming, who says, this is closer to what we should have expected than many would have led us to believe preseason. They took significant bets on multiple positions with players that were unproven, flawed, etc., and they spent a massive amount on free agents, giving the impression that this was a contending year. They were patching holes with duct tape, and were they to keep Darnold, it would have burst at any moment. This needed to be a down year to force a massive look inward at their roster construction, coaching schemes, etc. I don't know how hot of a take that was beforehand. I was stoked on the season, and I will not apologize for being excited about a season where I get to, evaluate the guy that could be the future at QB, right? I was excited about that, and next time there's a young QB that's completely unproven that we know nothing about, I'm going to be excited again. I will learn nothing from this, and I'm satisfied with that. But I would say they needed this down year to force a massive look inward. Might have merit to, I'm a purist. You should never want to lose games. But it may be healthy. I do think this is a bit of a heat check for Kevin O'Connell, especially in the way that he has designed the scheme this year and in the amount that he has asked of his quarterback. I think that O'Connell needs to learn lessons from this. And if those were lessons that needed to be learned, I guess we had to sacrifice a year to do it. That seems like quite a bit of a cost, but I guess if that's what it takes. Area political candidate says, I've seen so many people talk about McCarthy and Turner being 22 years old, implying they need some time to catch up to their peers. I'm sick of that talking point. I don't think the Vikings should get any fraction of grace for the disappointing starts from either player on account of their age. If being 21 or 22 years old is any amount of excuse, the Vikings should have probably considered drafting 21-year-olds. You probably meant to say 23 or 24-year-olds, like 6-year COVID guys. Look, that's the trade-off though, right? When you're in the draft, most draft analysts will gravitate toward younger players because if you're young enough to be considered NFL caliber, or if you're good enough to be considered NFL caliber with that much development in front of you, you have a higher ceiling. That's the general logic, and they're just chasing that. I would say, look, I end up talking to a lot of people about this, especially people who are a lot older than me, decades older than me. And I feel like this point resonates with them a lot. If you're kind of 45 and over, what were you good at when you were 22? Really, not what you thought you were good at, but what were you what did you mastered at 22? I don't know. I think it's a totally valid thing. The problem is the NFL is not going to give them a fraction of grace. So you're going to get your wish here. We as analysts can try to be reasonable and try to, be normal about, hey, he's got his whole career ahead of him and this is probably as bad as he'll ever be. But the NFL might not give him the chance, right? I mean, Christian Ponder didn't get 7 years to find his Geno Smith renaissance, right? He's out of the league, right? So that's just the way things go. There is not the patience that there maybe needs to be. And that means that if you are one of these 21-year-old prospects, you better be ready to compete in the NFL or you probably should have gone back to school. Jordan Addison's Dogs Same Game Parlay says Vikings should bring in Mitchell Trubisky for a camp competition next year. He would beat out J.J. McCarthy and have a Sam Darnold-esque season, proving once again KOC can do it with established QBs deemed busts. We win the North and lose in the first playoff game. 2018 redo. Love it. Sure. I don't think Mitch Trubisky, I think he's pretty much entrenched himself as a backup. I think if he had the renaissance in him, it probably would have happened by now. We've got players drafted well after him that are like hitting their kind of second wind of their career. Like Sam Darnold was drafted after Trubisky. I think Trubisky is just a backup. But I see the thing that you're saying. We got to find, that's why I'm saying the Mac Jones. We got to find that guy this year if you're going to go for the veteran thing, because you're not going to be able to, I'm joking about, we've had a lot of fun with the Burrow thing, but you're not going to, that guy doesn't grow on trees. That guy doesn't just suddenly become available. That would be a not the kind of thing you can really rely on. That would be kind of a miracle. JJ McCatharsis, nice. Mick Catharsis says, if the reasons you pointed out are true, basically a bunch of people are not listening to each other. Okay, yeah. So if you missed it, I pointed out on the squad show, and then I said it on yesterday's podcast that I have a theory that, there's a lot of discombobulation on the sideline because people aren't communicating and listening to each other. And the example I brought up was the timeout, 11 men, 12 men on the field snafu in the field goal room or in the field goal unit. I know that somebody's job on that sideline is to make sure that all the people are right. And either that guy failed to count to 11, which would be rough, or somebody else told Ivan Pace to come off the field because he didn't trust that guy to do his job. Either way, people aren't respecting each other's, delineation of work. I'm actually going to, okay, this is where I'm going to end this. And I'll finish reading your hot take after, and then that'll be the show. But okay, so as some of you know, I went to film school, right? And you do a lot of student sets and stuff, and you kind of get to know the etiquette of a film set. And one of the things in the etiquette of a film set is you do not touch the other guy's work. It's just, if you go on set and you're working with lighting, you do not touch a lens. Even if it's out in the middle of a walkway and you got to move it. No, do not touch it. It's not your job. You absolutely should not touch it. And I've actually heard stories of people being fired for violating this, like faux pas. Like on the spot, you're off the set, somebody find me a new grip. So that was that wired my brain a lot, right? Because I was learning those rules at 18, 19, 20 years old. And that really wired me to be in everything in my workplace, to be very like deferential. If that's not my job, I ain't touching it. It's not my thing. It's not my responsibility. And it would be, to me, I always feel it would be like patronizing to go start doing someone else's job for them because I see that I think I can do it better. Like, stop doing that. That's like if I found somebody doing my job, I'd be pissed off about it. So I think about that on a football sideline, and I think, man, if people are starting to feel like they have to do each other's jobs, that's when the dysfunction's really going to be bad. And that's when you're going to get miscommunications. That's when you're going to get players who don't know what to do because one coach told them A and the other coach told them B, and now there's confusion. And all those coaches had the same conversations with 8 different players, and they all got different priorities, and now everybody's not on the same page. That's my theory. Okay. So anyways, if those reasons are true, the hard part, building a roster, is already done. It would suggest that we are in a much better spot than the doom and gloom suggests. I still think this is a good roster. Bad play suggests otherwise, but when I mainly blame the dysfunction rather than the players, who amongst us hasn't checked out mentally at work when the higher ups are running around with their heads cut off? If you trim the dysfunction, the talent this roster possesses could allow for a quick bounce back. You know what? Sure. I think trimming out the dysfunction is a lot easier said than done. If there's one guy that's the problem, okay, that's great, right? If you want to say like, well, it was all Ryan Gregson's fault, but that would feel a little bit like a sacrificial lamb. But to me, that is like a cultural issue. When I've been, for at least in my work, my life, when I've been at places where people don't stay in their lanes and start kind of picking at other people's lanes, you can't just get rid of one guy and have that stop happening. It is a cultural thing. It's this permeating like disease that everybody catches, even whether they had it before they entered the building or not. And So I think to really trim out the dysfunction, you would probably need a clear out of players, by the way, guilty of this too. So you would need to clear out like a lot. You would need to go full scale rebuild. And then you're losing a lot of that talent. And a lot of that talent is on a clock, 1 or 2 year deals, or they're over 30 and who knows when the age cliff happens. Not to mention, the injury proneness of it all. So I get what you're saying, that this roster still is on paper very talented. I do think, however, that it would be really irresponsible for the Vikings to go into the offseason with a run it back mentality. You can't be the worst. This is the worst offense by EPA per dropback, at least. This is the worst passing offense you likely have ever seen in Minnesota, depending on how old you are. But I'm trying to think, if you were old enough to remember maybe the Les Steckel year, you probably have seen worse, or like the 1987 strikes. So maybe there are a couple in the 80s. But for me, I was born in 92. This is the worst passing offense I've ever seen statistically. I verified that with True Media. The worst. So, and the worst quarterback play I've ever seen statistically for somebody who has like started a certain number of, obviously you've had some weird backup moments like Joe Webb and, Jaron Hall or whatever, but those didn't qualify with the minimum attempts. This is the worst, like, true blue starting quarterback that I've ever seen. This is worse than any of that. So I would often come on this show with, like, in the Kirk Cousins years and say, hey, they won, 9 games, or they won 8 or 7 games, right? They're just a couple of bounces away from maybe being something. Maybe they're going to try to tweak, solve some problems, fix this, fix that, and run it back. And I thought that was reasonable when you feel like you're close. But right now, if the Vikings tried to change a few things and run it back, it would feel like going from a 4-win team to a 6-win team. And that's not enough progress to justify spending entire years on it. I'll leave you with that. We'll talk a little bit more about the scheme problems, McCarthy, and maybe what to expect with Brosmer. I don't really know. We'll figure it out. That'll be tomorrow. I'll see y'all then. And as always, Skol.